Well, welcome again. Tonight I want to start a new series. And in a sense, it's not a new series. A number of years ago, we developed and taught the 60 characteristics that come out of complex trauma. The 60 coping skills, survival skills, the tools that come out of complex trauma to survive. What I want to do now is go back through a number of those characteristics in greater detail, just to take it a little bit further in your thinking, and especially if some of the tools that we're going to talk about are your main tools, just to again help you grow and understand better what is going on and how to become healthier. And so tonight I want to begin with perfectionism. Perfectionism is a very common thing that comes out of complex trauma. Often people don't understand perfectionism as having a root in complex trauma, and I want to show why. And I want to help you understand whether or not you have that as one of your coping skills. My first encounters, I think, where I really started to understand perfectionism is I remember a client about 16, 17 years ago where he was asked to, all the clients were asked to draw a picture. And this client, he would draw his picture, then he'd go around and check everybody else's picture. And if he didn't think his was the best, he'd rip it up and start another picture. And he went through several attempts before he was finally done. Everybody else had finished their picture way ahead of him, but he had in his mind the perfect, the best picture. You can also see it in mothers or fathers who are determined to have the best kids. And so they look for proof that their kids are the best. So they look at how involved they are in sports and extracurricular activities, that they're more involved than anybody else. They look at their report cards, that they're better than any other kids. And if one of the kids has a poor report card, they think about taking them to a doctor to find out what's wrong with them. They focus on their body, their appearance, their accomplishments. It's all about being the best. I've seen clients when it comes to filling glasses of juice and wanting it to be equal for everybody, that they will fill the glasses and then carefully check them. And if they think one's a wee bit low, they'll add a few more drops, and it'll take them a long time before they can let the glasses be delivered to the people because they got to make sure they're exactly equal. Or a mother who is going to have some friends come to visit, and so she wants her house to be immaculate. And the kids, they want to play with their toys, and the mother gets angry with them that they're messy. And so the kids are under all this stress because mom's under all this stress that she has to have the perfect house when her friends come to visit. I found it helpful to think of perfectionism in terms of domains. And you may have all of these 7 domains of perfectionism, but their perfectionism is seen most clearly in the workplace or at school. They have to be the best student, the best employee. Others, you can see it in their intimate relationships, their friendships, where they place these unrealistic standards on themselves about how to be a good friend, or they place the standards on others of what they expect others to do for them, and it's an unrealistic standard. Some, it's in the area of physical activity, and so they're the best in the gym. They work out harder. They work out more consistently. Come rain or shine, they are running. Others, it's their environment. Their home has to be immaculate. Their backyard, their front yard can't be a weed. The grass has to be cut religiously. Others, their hygiene, their health. So their strict diet, strict cleanliness, all so important to them. Physical appearance, they can't go out in public unless their face is on perfectly, unless their clothes are excellent. Or in the area of how they speak or write. Perfect grammar, the right use of words, all become so important to them. So those are domains of perfectionism. Now, I think it's important to understand that if you were to talk to a perfectionist at the very beginning of their teen adult life, where it isn't yet a big problem for them, they would not describe their perfectionism in a negative way. They would describe it in positive terms. So they would say that they are just committed to pursuing excellence. And they'd feel quite good about that. Or they just say they're a high achiever. They're a type A personality, driven. Or they're just very self-motivated or detail-oriented or very disciplined in their life. And so they would present it as this is a positive trait. But what I hope to show you is what starts off as looking like a very positive thing turns into a negative. And so what you begin to realize that in truth, instead of pursuing excellence, they're actually pursuing validation. They're longing for acceptance. That's why they're trying to be perfect. And they're people who are paralyzed by fear. And they're very hard on themselves. And so it is something that turns from looking very good to being something that is very destructive. How does a person become a perfectionist? What's behind it? And this is the piece that I think is so important to understand if you want to help people properly in dealing with perfectionism. Perfectionism, in my mind, in most cases, comes from complex trauma. Now, let me explain that. Over and over, I tell people that the greatest negative result that comes out of complex trauma, a child not feeling safe, is shame. Where they think the reason I'm abandoned, neglected, abused is because something's wrong with me. I'm not good enough. So if the two people, mom and dad, in my life, plus my siblings, who have got to know me best, abuse me, neglect me, abandon me, then that means that every person who gets to know me will abuse me, neglect me, abandon me. And so shame is self-identity, who I see myself as, and it's a very negative thing. Now then, what comes out of shame is all kinds of negative things. So first, fear of abandonment and rejection. So the fear is if people get to know me, they will respond like mom and dad did. And so now I'm afraid to let people get to know me. And if people get to know me, they're going to hurt me. And then if I ever fail, I will be laughed at. I will be put down. I will be hurt even more. So here's a person that's hiding who they are, not wanting anybody to get to know them, convinced that being authentic is a bad thing. It always results in getting hurt. But they still have needs that need to be met. They still long to be loved. They still long to be respected and accepted and being part of. And then on top of that, shame produces all these negative emotions: pain, fear, anger, guilt. And you can't resolve them. And so they just stay there and grow. And you live with all of this unresolved, painful emotions. And you can't validate yourself. You don't like yourself. You wish you weren't you. And so you need others to validate you. All of that comes out of shame. So what the brain does is begins to explore options to solve shame. And this is the critical piece to understand. And so the brain can't relax until it finds what it feels is a solution for a painful thing. So shame is extremely painful. So it will try wearing masks. I won't be authentic. I'll wear a mask and then people will love me and like me. Or I'll become a people pleaser. That way they'll love me and respect me. Or I'll learn to manipulate people. Not tell them what I really want, but still get my needs met. Or I'll become a control freak. I'll get a place of power, and then I'll control others so that they respect me and meet my needs. Or I'll develop codependent relationships where I rescue people and then they adore me. Or I'll just not set boundaries with people because boundaries gets people upset. So all of those look like possible solutions to shame. And so the brain will try those. And for some people, the brain lands on perfectionism. And what it then says is, I think I found the solution to shame. If I am perfect, I can then respect myself. I like myself if I'm perfect. And others will like me. Others will respect me. Others will validate me. And so I will earn their love. I will get love. And if I'm perfect, I won't get hurt. I won't fail. And therefore, I can help things run smoother in the family. And I'll never be a burden to others. Perfectionism looks like the solution to my biggest problems, my greatest longings, how to get my needs met. And so people go into perfectionism. So how can you tell if you are a perfectionist? So I want to give you 31 characteristics of perfectionism. Check the ones that apply to you, and then you can begin to look at whether or not you're a perfectionist. And so we'll do this together. So number one, you feel like you're going to fail at everything you try. You'll just not be able to do it perfectly, which to you means you'll fail. You struggle to be honest and authentic and share your thoughts and feelings with others. For fear, they won't see you in the same way. They'll see you as weak. Controlling, needing to have everything just so, needing to have everybody do what you want so you don't get hurt, so your image is maintained. 4, obsessed with rules, lists, work. So you're always focused on you got to do it this way, you got to do it right. Your to-do list, making sure you get everything done. Or you flip that and you are extremely apathetic. You just can't quite get around to doing what you need to do. And I'll explain that one in a bit. You view the end product as the most important part of an undertaking. It's not the process of the job that you're looking at, it's the end product. That's what matters. And you don't see a task as being finished unless the result is perfect. And so you take an excessive amount of time to complete a lot of tasks because they got to be perfect. Part of that then is obsessive thinking, planning over and over, thinking of every possible detail that you need to cover. Can't turn your brain off as you worry about whether you'll be able to do it well enough. Even after you do something, you're never totally satisfied with what you've done or with yourself. You set unrealistic standards for yourself. You live your life by shoulds. I should have done this. I should have thought of that. And those are unrealistic. When you fail, you're very hard on yourself. And then, if you're pretty good at kind of being up in this perfect place, you look down on others who aren't as good as you. And that makes you feel better about yourself. You feel guilty if you relax, because you always need to be doing something. Relax looks like you're lazy. You feel guilty if you say no to somebody, because you think, I should have been there for them. I should have helped them. You reject the weak parts of yourself and try to keep them hidden. You don't want anybody else to see them. You have difficulty accepting your limitations. So you don't want to think that you need a certain amount of sleep, that you can't work 20 hours a day. You think you should be able to if you just try harder. You have difficulty being vulnerable. And you have difficulty with emotions. You much rather live out of your brain. It can be neat and tidy. Emotions make life messy and unpredictable. You have difficulty with intimacy and intimate relationships. Because intimacy calls for sharing, for vulnerability, for authenticity, and your weakness might come out. You have difficulty with change, with the unknown, because there might be something happens that you weren't prepared for and you might fail. And so, when you go to a job where the learning curve is quite long because it's just a very involved process, you don't like those kind of jobs. You want a job where you can become perfect at it in the first day. You get depressed by unmet goals. You fear failure, rejection, abandonment. And so if people start to get to know you, fear starts to increase inside of you that they may abandon you. And so perfectionists are actually controlled by fear. Perfectionists don't understand unconditional love. They see love as something that they have to earn, and they can only earn it if they are perfect. Perfectionists are characterized by all or nothing thinking. I have to be perfect. If I have one mistake, I'm a total failure. That's the all or nothing. They are characterized at times by procrastination. So they resist sometimes starting a task for fear that they're not going to be able to do it perfectly. And so they can't start it until they're sure they can do it perfectly, so they procrastinate. Or they start a task and they spend so much time doing it to make it perfect that they avoid or don't get to other important tasks. And so they all get pushed back, procrastinated, because of how long it's taking to do an existing task. They tend to focus on their failures more than their successes. Validation comes from their externals, their accomplishments, not from who they are. They compare themselves with others constantly, needing to be always a bit better than everybody else. And they are afraid to ask for help or admit that they are struggling. That would be failure. That would be weakness. So 31 characteristics. How did you do? You might be thinking there, I'm a perfectionist, I get it. But is it a big deal? Well, what I want you to understand was the brain developed perfectionist to solve the shame problem. But I hope you see that it backfires. So instead of solving shame, it actually ends up creating more shame because nobody can be perfect. And so you will fail. You won't be good enough. You won't meet the standards you set for yourself. So you always are feeding, I'm not good enough. I'm a failure. And so that then creates even greater fear. That creates greater anxiety. That creates greater relationship problems because you're trying to hide more and more. And that is the problem with perfectionism. Now, let me put it this way. I think for many people, what they begin to realize that perfectionism has become a prison to them. And perfectionism is a taskmaster that is very cruel, that is never satisfied, that is always pointing out what they're doing wrong, and they're locked in this prison that feels like failure. And it's a prison of shame. Another way to look at it is perfectionism mistrains your conscience. And what it does is says, unless you're perfect, you failed. And so every time you're not perfect, your conscience bothers you, but that's false guilt. It doesn't mean you're a failure, but the false guilt says you are. And so now you have a conscience that is always going off constantly because you're never perfect. And so you now live in constant guilt. It's really false guilt, but to you, it feels like true guilt. Now let me just read a couple things that people have written about perfectionism. First, perfectionism is used as a shield to protect against the pain of blame, judgment, or shame. In other words, what we just said, it's the brain solution to shame. Julia Cameron wrote, perfectionism is not a quest for the best. It is actually the pursuit of the worst in ourselves. The part that tells us that nothing we do will ever be good enough, that we should try harder. And then somebody sent me this that they had written. I tried so hard to be who you want me to be, and the more I tried, the more I failed. So why bother trying at all? Or it just means I have to try harder. There must be something wrong with me. If I can't be perfect, it must mean that what I've been told is true. I'm not good enough. I try to quiet the inside storm by perfecting the outside mess, but it never goes away. Perfectionism trained me to live in instant gratification. Stay in the easy, simple things because I can perfect those. Don't try anything new or things I know I will fail at. Don't know how to work hard for anything or overcome challenges or apply myself so hard to be patient with the slow process. It's easy for me to remove chaos. It's easy for me to stop behaviors because failing is not an option for me. It's tied in with my worth and value. Fear motivates me more than anything else. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of not being accepted or loved, fear of getting hurt. My expectations of myself also affect my expectations of others. So I'm angry all the time and pointing out other people's flaws. I think everything should come easily and I should have to work hard for anything. I shouldn't have to work hard for anything. I'm trying to be perfect to make others happy, make their lives easier by not being a burden. Try to fix the family's problems by being perfect and problemless so that I can guarantee they will love me. I know I'm far from perfect, but I can't be anything but. Quite profound when you think about it. Well, let's go to healing. How do we change this perfectionism? How do we grow? So I hope you see that the first place we have to go is heal the shame. That's really the issue. Perfectionism is a symptom of that issue. And so you have to begin to work on your shame issues. And we've done a whole series on shame because it's such an important topic for people from complex trauma. Let me just add this. I work with many people who are perfectionists, and they get away with it for a long time because they're very smart, very talented, very gifted. And so they do very well at their job. They're kind of seen as a success, as the model employee, the model person in their community because they're so driven and they're good at it. And they would probably go through the rest of their life continuing in that world unless they had one problem, one weakness they couldn't get victory over, one continual, persistent failure that was starting to devastate their life and their intimate relationships. And for some people, addiction is that thing. And it becomes actually a blessing because it forces them to stop trying to be perfect, to look at themselves, at their shame, and to begin to deal with the root issues. Second thing that is so important to do, distinguish between excellence or doing my best and perfectionism. So perfectionism is that straight arrow, I got to do it perfectly the first time. Excellence is a wiggly line that is characterized by failures, rapid progress, slow progress, setbacks. It is not a straight line. Also, excellence, doing my best, takes into account all of my responsibilities and the amount of time I have in any given week. And so it's able to allocate, I only have this much time to do this job. I will give it my best within the time, but it will get done to the best of my ability, given my responsibilities. And so being done is better than having to do every single one perfectly, just not possible. Now let me just help you think of perfectionism and healthy when you look at goals. So goals, perfectionists, they get weighed down by goals. They obsess in their thinking. They have fear that they might fail. But what's healthy? I've set a goal. I'm excited about it. I'm going to plan. But there's an excitement. Very different from perfectionism. How about taking action? Perfectionism. I can't do it unless I do it perfectly, so I procrastinate. What's a healthy person do? I'm going to start this. I've learned stuff, but I know I'm going to keep learning as I do it. And so take action and improve as I go. Very different. How about personal satisfaction? Perfectionism. Constant dissatisfaction. Nothing is ever good enough. Discontent. But what is in a healthy person? You celebrate each victory. You celebrate the things that were good throughout a day. You give yourself credit where credit is due. Totally different from a perfectionist. And so you can see the inside world of healthy versus perfectionism is very different. Healthy is there's a joy, a happiness, a contentment. Perfectionism, fear, worry, hard on self, down on self. How about work versus self? Caring for work, caring for self. Perfectionism, work is where I build my image. So that gets all of my attention. I neglect self. I neglect some relationships and put an inordinate amount of time into work. Healthy, I find a balance between work, relationships, and self-care so that I can do all of them well. Attitude towards failure. Perfectionism. Hate failure. Beat yourself up after you fail. Healthy. See failure as something to learn from. See failure as part of success. Very different. Macro versus micro. So in a healthy, you look at a big picture. I need to get all this stuff done this week. And you prioritize. This is the most important thing, second most important thing. Here's how much time I have. And you get a big picture of your life, and then you can delegate to yourself this amount of time for this amount of time and resources to this. But not with perfectionism. You get obsessed with every little detail, even on the stuff that's not that important. And you stress yourself out and get very down on yourself. So that's a comparison. Two final things. Confront the rigid, unrealistic rules you live by. Start paying attention to the times you say, I should. And look at what is your expectation there. And confront that, because it's probably unrealistic. It's probably a lie. Finally, commit yourself to change. Don't just say, I got to stop being a perfectionist. Why don't you do something and purposely leave something not perfect? It will drive you crazy at first, but you're going to push yourself to change even though it's uncomfortable. So that's perfectionism. I really hope that if you're a perfectionist, you can just make that commitment to change one thing this week and gradually begin to work on your perfectionism. Well, that's the end of part 1. I hope that is helpful to you. We're going to take a minute break. I'll come back and have a Christian part. If you're not interested in the Christian part, not a problem. You're free to go. Thanks for being here. And I'll be back in a minute. Well, welcome back. We've been working our way through the life of Peter, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, man who became a prominent leader once Jesus returned to heaven. And today we're coming to Matthew 16. So let me read it to you. From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem. So you remember that Jesus has taken his disciples up to the most northern part of Israel, Caesarea Philippi. And there he asked them, "Who do you think I am?" And Peter responded and said, "You're the Messiah." And Jesus said, "You're so right." And so now he tells them we're going to go to Jerusalem and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. But Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him and saying such things. "Heaven forbid, Lord," he said, "this will never happen to you." Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it." Can you imagine the shock when they've just had this announcement in Caesarea Philippi, "Jesus, you're the Messiah." And Jesus says, "Yes, you're right." And then he says, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem to die." It just sounded so weird. And so Peter gets all upset. He can't let this happen. He has to stop it because this is the worst idea in the world. What's going on with Peter? Well, Peter thought that for Jesus to be the Messiah meant that he was going to go to Jerusalem and become a king. That he was going to defeat the Roman world. He was going to overthrow the Jewish leaders and become the king. And so that was his expectation. And Jesus saying he's going to go and die, in his mind is, how can the Messiah, the anointed, which means the anointed king, how can he die? And so he is just, this is wrong, and he tries to stop it. He rebukes Jesus. And Jesus turns to him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, Jesus isn't saying that Peter is Satan, he is saying that he is expressing words that Satan would express. He is expressing the sentiments that Satan would express, which is Satan didn't want Jesus to die because he knew that would lead to his own defeat. And so Jesus rebukes Peter. But why? Let me take it further. Why does this upset Peter so much? Because to Peter and the Jewish people at that time, if you were to ask them, what is the problem with life, with the world, with Israel, they would say it's political. It's the Romans. The Romans are corrupt. The Romans are awful. The Romans suppress us, abuse us. They tax us to poverty. And it's the Jewish religious leaders and civil leaders. They're corrupt. It's a political problem. So we need a political solution. We need a new king. We need God's choice of king, the Messiah. That he would come, overthrow all the corrupt political forces, and set up a just government who would remake Israel and remake the world. They didn't see that the problem wasn't really political. It was the human condition. It was the human heart. That's where the solution needed to be. And that's why Jesus had to die first. In their mind, it was all external. It was political. And so, let me take that further. When you begin to look at what does their political solution result in? Well, it would result in a life where there was no corruption, a life where they weren't overly taxed so they'd have more money, a life where there wasn't abuse so life would be easier, more comfortable, all their external problems and frustrations would go away. And so what I want you to see is that the disciples had come to the right conclusion in identifying Jesus as the Messiah, but to the wrong conclusion as to what the priority of the Messiah was. So they had understood part of it correctly, but got part of it wrong. But if you take it further, what you realize is that the disciples had developed a fantasy picture of what Jesus would do. That he would make life easy, that he would get rid of problems, that they would be in a constant happy state because of pleasant external environment. They had a fantasy picture of a Messiah. You know, I got thinking about that. I think a lot of people from complex trauma have this fantasy picture that if they start following God, he'll take away their problems. He'll make life easy for them. He'll give them positive, warm emotions all the time. They won't have bad days. They won't struggle. They won't fail. God will make it so they can live out their perfectionism easily and have all the results of that, everybody loving them and respecting them. And sadly, a lot of churches give out that kind of message. Now, I want you to think about what was Jesus like as a salesperson for his own movement. Did he say, yes, boys, I'm going to be the Messiah you want, who will make life wonderful for you? If you think about it, Jesus wasn't what we would call a very good salesman, because what does he say? You got to take up your cross too. So I'm going to take up my cross, which will end in crucifixion and death. You got to take up your cross, which means you got to die to your agenda and surrender to mine. You got to die to just indulging your desires and learn healthy self-care, but to sacrifice and love and care for others. Jesus is not sounding like a great salesman because he's saying, come on, follow me, and you'll die too. Can you imagine the shock for the disciples to hear this. That would just throw their world upside down. It would smash their fantasy. Jesus was saying the problem was not political, it was internal. It was deeper. And to follow him meant that you had to die to your selfish desires and follow his way. I'm sure Peter must have struggled with that. But Peter became one of the greatest people to live that truth out. Peter went through all kinds of hardship, thrown into prison, mistreated. Eventually, he died by crucifixion. And history tells us that he said, "I'm not worthy to be crucified like my master Jesus, so please crucify me upside down." He gave his life. And so, I think it's so important for us to learn from this. Check ourselves. Do we have a fantasy picture of what it means to follow God? Because if so, God is going to smash that. And we're not going to like that. But if we come to accept it, then we'll find true life in our soul. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for this lesson. Lord, we all need to learn this lesson that Peter learned, that you aren't here to create fantasies. You're not here to be a genie in a bottle. You're here to lead us to true life, which often goes against what our limbic brain thinks will give us a happy life. And so help each person as they look at their own heart and help them to see any places where they've developed this fantasy. Amen. Well, thank you again for being part of Friday. We look forward to these times and to having you, and just, again, hope they're a great help in your own life. See you.